are to issue advisory opinions to legislators if there is any ambiguity or doubt about how the code is to be applied. The Commission is required to give those opinions as requested. That should give helpful guidance to legislators as they make this change and try to live under the provisions of our code. We have an ethics school that's established, and every year there'll be training in ethics for our legislators and their staff. There is another provision that allows a legislator to request a safe harbor or no action letter. So if a legislator is contemplating a particular transaction and worries that he may run afoul of a legislative ethics proscription, he can ask the Commission for an opinion that is a safe harbor opinion. The Commission has discretion to issue such an opinion, and if they do, the legislator will be immunized from an ethics complaint. He can't be complained of if his conduct is the same as the facts he put forward in requesting the ethics opinion. When a complaint against the legislator can only be filed by 3 people, any 3 persons can file a complaint, but they have to act together, and they have to bear the cost of processing that complaint before the Commission. I can speak from some personal experience here in terms of what a practical impediment that may be to citizens who have a notion to bring a complaint. David Irvine and I represented some of the complainants against legislators last year. We donated hours and hours and hours of time, but I don't think we're going to be doing that on a regular basis. And a citizen who wants to bring one of these complaints and pay somebody to help him, it can be a fairly difficult process and fairly expensive. So they have to be serious-minded and convinced that there's been a wrong commensurate with what they're going to have to invest to prosecute that wrong. The legislator, on the other hand, will have his expenses paid out of the legislative council's budget. So he will get a lawyer of his choosing at public expense. But the citizens who bring the complaint have to bear their own expense. There is an initial screening process where, on a confidential basis, the Commission looks at the complaint that's filed. And if it lacks substance, or if it's frivolous, it's thrown out. If, on the other hand, there is substantial evidence and it looks like the complaint might be substantiated, you leave this confidential process and go to a full-blown adversary proceeding where there's notice, evidentiary standards, and a plenary hearing for review. The Commission then makes findings and conclusions and a recommended form of discipline. It is not empowered to make any final decision. That's a constitutional constraint we felt that we needed to leave in our bill. But it will make formal findings and conclusions and recommendations, and these will be made public so that there, again, is an element of transparency there. And then those findings and conclusions and recommendations are sent to the respective house where the legislature sits. And that house then, in a public hearing that is open to the public, has to review and deliberate on the Commission's findings, conclusions, and recommendations, and vote yea or nay publicly as to whether to affirm or disaffirm that ruling. That is the process that we've had our disciplinary actions take, and we think it's a fair process for all concerned. There's one other thing I might comment on, and that is, while there are many safeguards, such as the confidential initial hearing and the allocation of expense in undertaking this kind of hearing and so forth, the independence of the tribunal itself, which is, we think, a major benefit to the legislator, and his own counsel, someone he chooses, who wouldn't have a conflict. Heretofore, the legislators had to use legislative counsel. That counsel may have a conflict of interest. We wanted the legislator to have a conflict-free attorney, and it's paid for at public expense. These are all benefits to safeguard and protect legislators from what many have feared are, wingnut or crackpot complaints, and we recognize that risk, and we want to make sure that our sitting officials are protected from that. Once the complainants, however, have run that gauntlet and then put on what lawyers call a prima facie case, that is, they have shown through a preponderance of evidence each and every element of a violation. So they've made a case that an ethical violation has occurred. At that point, there is a burden-shifting mechanism in our bill, which is the same burden-shifting mechanism that is applied to fiduciaries in business, a partner in a partnership, the director or officer of a corporation, someone in a trust position. Once that prima facie case is made, the risk of non-persuasion shifts to the fiduciary, or in this case, the legislator, and he has to, from that point, bear that burden to show why an ethics violation hasn't occurred. That is consonant with the business standard. We think it's rightly applicable to our legislators, and it's rightly applicable in a practical sense because usually only the fiduciary is the person who actually knows what went on and has the information available to him or her to prove or disprove that a violation occurred. So this is not a criminal process. Our bill does not criminalize any conduct. And so whatever burden of proof is applied, it's appropriate to a civil context. We've heard some comments from legislators that, well, we're guilty until proven innocent. That's not the way the bill reads, as I've just described. There's a lot that complainants have to prove at the threshold and at a formal hearing before there's any burden shifting that occurs. So they're wrong on the facts, but they're also wrong because they're thinking that this is some kind of a criminal process, and it's not. We don't criminalize anything. Nobody goes to jail after an ethics proceeding, unless some local county attorney or the Attorney General of the state of Utah decides, based on evidence spaded up by the commission, that a crime has occurred, and they decide on their own, under normal criminal processes, to initiate a prosecution. Our bill does not do that, and it criminalizes nothing. And so the appropriate burden of proof is a civil one, and we feel that we've been very fair to legislators in that respect. That's it. Thank you very much. We'll take questions after Brent speaks.
And I'm speaking as a private citizen, not in my capacity in my professional career. I think overall we need ethics in all governments, whether it's local, state, county, schools. I think it's important. And I've worked with the legislature over 20 years during sessions, and I find overall the overwhelming majority of our legislators do a good job. They are very ethical. There are a few abuses every once in a while. I saw a few happen to some personal friends of mine, one who ran for public office and was pretty much bullied, not only individually, but also in the career she was in, also really affected her standing in that organization. So there are a few abuses every once in a while that somehow they need to make sure that there is a mechanism available to correct those types of abuses. I don't see that a mill